Study basers! In this lesson, we'll discuss a very common fretting hand technique, the hammer-on. So we'll look at what they are, why we use them, how to make them sound great, and how they're notated. What is a hammer-on? A hammer-on is one type of technique that lets you pluck once and produce two or even more notes on the same string using your fretting hand. So I'm plucking the first note and pressing with my first finger, but then I don't pluck and I just strike with my fretting hand finger on the next note. So I get two notes for the price of one. So how do they work? A hammer-on starts with an already ringing string. So when a string is already ringing, you press down or hammer another note using another finger. So I'm not plucking twice, I pluck once, and I produce the second note with the hammering finger. So most often you're pressing a fret with one finger like I just did, followed by striking with another finger that's higher up. So here it's first finger to your third finger. But it could be first to second, first to third, first to fourth. Any combo is possible. But now the starting note could also be an open string. Most hammer-ons that you'll encounter hammer only one note. But it's also possible to hammer on two or three, or even four if you start with the open string. Now, why would you use a hammer-on? Why not just pluck the notes like normal? Well, a hammer-on is an articulation, and articulations are ways of saying the same thing differently. So a hammer-on is just a slightly different way of producing the same notes. So if you listen to the hammer-on, you'll hear that it has a slightly different sound versus plucked notes. And the difference is the hammer-on has a kind of a bright attack. So it's a little buzzy. And versus the plucked note, that hammer-on sound might make the note stand out more. It might draw a little bit more attention in the line, or it could just add some variety to your bass line. So it's really an artistic choice whether or not you want one sound versus the other. Now other times players are using hammer-ons just to give their plucking hand a bit of a break. So when you're hammering on, that moment that you're hammering on frees your plucking hand to maybe move to another string. There are three keys to getting a good sounding hammer-on. The first key is to hold the starting note. So it's important that you hold or sustain that first note until the next note is ringing out clearly. And this is always the first place that students go wrong. If you lift your finger before the hammered-on note is ringing out, you'll stop the string from ringing, and then you won't get very much sound out of the hammered-on note. Once the hammered-on note is ringing out with the new finger, then you can release or relax the finger on the previous note. This problem almost always comes from having trouble stretching to the next note. So students often release their finger too soon, trying to get to that next note. So what you need to do is force yourself to hold down that starting note until you hear the next one ringing out clearly. The second key is to strike behind the fret. Something important for almost all fretting techniques is to press right behind the fret. You don't want to strike with your hammer-on back here. Again, you have to stretch. You'll get a much clearer tone, and you'll have to use less force and pressure to get that note to ring out. In my fretting video, I go into a lot of detail about why finger placement is so important. The third key to a good hammer-on is to use a quick attack. Now that doesn't mean that the rhythm needs to be quick. Rhythmically, there can be lots of time in between the notes. By quick attack, I mean that when your hammering finger needs to come down, it comes down very quickly. So if it doesn't, what happens is your finger touches or mutes the string before it makes contact with the fret. So if you notice that your hammered-on notes are too quiet, and you're sure that it's not from lifting your finger off too soon, or that you're not hitting close enough behind the fret, it's probably because you're coming down too slowly. The quicker your attack is, the fuller and louder the note will ring out. With practice, you're going to learn to control the speed and velocity of your hammering finger, and then you can get an array of sounds from soft to bright. Besides getting a poor sounding hammer-on, the next problem that students face is the rhythm of the hammer-on. The hammered-on note needs to be just as rhythmically accurate as any other note would be. Let's say that the bass line should sound like this. When students are getting started with hammer-ons, they almost always rush the hammered-on note, meaning they play it too early. So really listen and pay attention to the rhythm of your hammered-on notes. As an exercise, play with a metronome and see if you can land every note on a click. In standard musical notation, hammer-ons are notated with a slur mark, which is an arced line that connects two or more different notes together. So if you're not paying attention, it's very easy to confuse the slur with a tie. So remember, a tie is an arced line that connects the exact same note, and it means that you hold that note through the duration of the second note. So it's a rhythmic marking. Now, to avoid confusion between ties and hammer-ons, people often write an H or an HO above or below the arced line for the hammer-on. In bass tab and my own alpha tab that I use on Study Bass, the same arced line with an H is written above the hammered-on notes. On Study Bass, you'll find my exercises and sample bass lines that apply the hammer-on technique. There's also a list of songs that have great bass lines applying hammer-ons. So listen to them and learn to play some of them. Hammer-ons are a really common bass technique. You need to get very comfortable with them. So to get a good sounding hammer-on, remember, hold your finger down until the next note is ringing out, aim for right behind the fret, and use a quick attack. Beyond that, remember that the rhythm has to be accurate, so don't rush that hammered-on note.